Today, we open case file 038. It begins with the complete erasure of a life's work. A mother named Eleanor, after a lifetime of diligent saving, had built a legacy valued at over $156,000. Within a month of her passing, every cent of it vanished from a secure estate account. Her family was given a story that was both terrifying and plausible. They were victims of a sophisticated, untraceable cybercrime. A phantom team of hackers had breached the bank's security and funneled the money offshore. This explanation, delivered by the executor of her will, was the perfect modern lie. It was a narrative designed to create a sense of hopeless finality, leveraging our collective fear of digital threats to shut down any further questions. The money was gone, the criminals were ghosts, and the case was cold before it even began. But this was a lie. There was no elite team of hackers. The crime wasn't digital, and it wasn't untraceable. The key to this $156,000 theft wasn't found in the complex code of the dark web. It was discovered on a single sheet of paper, tucked away in a dusty file cabinet. This is a case of blatant executor fraud, a betrayal from the single most trusted position in a family's financial life. It is a chilling demonstration of a tactic I call grief exploitation, where a perpetrator uses a family's sorrow as the perfect smokescreen for a calculated crime. As your family wealth detective, our analysis today will be a comprehensive forensic examination. We will proceed in two distinct parts. First, I will lay out the entire, uninterrupted narrative. You will hear the full story of Eleanor's legacy, the intricate deception carried out by her stepson, and the determined search for the truth that brought his crime to light. After you have all the facts, we will pivot. I will guide you through a complete debrief of the case. We will perform a psychological autopsy of the perpetrator, break down the specific felonies that were committed, and most importantly, I will provide you with the actionable, legally sound prevention strategies that would have made this crime impossible. This case is a critical education in wealth protection. The questions it raises are ones every family must answer. Is your chosen executor truly vetted? Are there any checks and balances on their power? And what systems are in place to verify their actions? To begin your journey to becoming your family's financial protector, tell me what state or country you're watching from in the comments and hit that subscribe button. The knowledge you gain here is your first line of defense. Now, let's open the file. We now begin our examination of the events in case file 058. This is the story of how a quiet family legacy was nearly erased, not by an outside force, but by a calculated betrayal from within. Eleanor lived her life by a code of quiet consistency. For 40 years as a town librarian, her world was one of order, care, and the gentle rustle of turning pages. This philosophy was the bedrock of her existence, extending deep into her personal finances. Her life was not a grand performance, but a series of deliberate, thoughtful rituals. Every Sunday evening, without fail, she would sit at her oak desk, the same one she'd had for 3 decades, and balance her checkbook to the exact penny. She would then file her bank statements and important receipts into a heavy, beige accordion file, its labels written in her neat, careful cursive. Her savings were not the result of a single windfall or a lucky investment, but the patient, brick-by-brick accumulation of a life lived with prudence and foresight. She viewed her nest egg as her final act of love for her 2 children, a foundation of security she had worked her entire life to provide. Her family was small, defined by a geography that created both dependence and distance. Her stepson, Leo, lived just a few towns over in the same flat Ohio landscape. After his father's passing a decade earlier, Eleanor had embraced him fully as her own. He was the local son, the one who was always there to help with yard work, to fix a leaky faucet, or to drive her to doctor's appointments. He had a background as a small business consultant, and he projected an easy aura of competence and worldly knowledge. He spoke of cash flows and investment vehicles with a casual confidence that made the rest of the family feel at ease. He was seen as successful, reliable, and responsible. Her daughter Maya lived 3 states away, a reality born of career and marriage. Their connection was strong, a bond fortified by daily phone calls that covered everything and nothing, and by frequent visits that were always too short. Despite this, Maya always carried a low hum of guilt for not being closer, for missing a holiday, for not being the one to provide that essential, hands-on help. This distance made her implicitly grateful for Leo's presence in her mother's life. She saw him as her extension, the family's man on the ground. In late autumn, what began as a persistent cough quickly escalated. Eleanor was hospitalized with a severe case of pneumonia. Her decline was shockingly rapid. The woman, who had been the unshakable constant in their lives, was suddenly gone. Her death left a vacuum of shock, grief, and a bewildering mountain of administrative tasks. In the disorienting days that followed, as funeral arrangements were being made and sympathies were being offered, the family looked for a source of stability. Leo, present and seemingly capable, stepped forward to manage the burdens. He was the named executor in Eleanor's will, a choice she had made years ago based on his proximity and business acumen. No one questioned it. In a time of overwhelming emotional chaos, his willingness to take charge felt like a blessing. It was the logical, responsible choice. A month passed. The formal rituals of mourning were over, but the deep, disorienting fog of sorrow remained. Life's normal rhythms felt alien. Maya was still struggling to process the immense finality of her mother's absence when her phone rang. It was Leo. His voice on the other end of the line was heavy, strained with a manufactured gravity that immediately put her on high alert. "Maya, you should probably sit down for this," he began, his tone a careful performance of reluctance and sorrow. "I just got off a very, very difficult call with the estate lawyer. There is a very serious problem." Maya's heart tightened, her mind immediately jumping to complications with the will or unforeseen debts. "What is it, Leo? What happened?" "It's the estate account," he said, and then he paused, letting the silence hang for dramatic effect. When he spoke again, his voice was laced with what sounded like distress. "It's been emptied, completely cleaned out. The bank believes it was a professional, highly sophisticated identity theft ring. They somehow got all of Mom's personal information, her social security number, everything, and just siphoned the funds." The silence that followed felt vast and cold. Maya couldn't form a word. "Everything?" she finally asked, her own voice barely a whisper. "What do you mean, everything?" "I mean all of it, Maya. Every last cent," he said, the words tumbling out in a well-rehearsed rush. "The savings, the funds from the stock portfolio sale, it's all gone. They moved it through a complex series of offshore accounts, bouncing it between different countries in a matter of hours. We've filed a police report. The bank has its fraud department on it, but the lawyers are being brutally honest with us. They say the chances of recovering any of it are practically zero. The trail is cold. It's just gone." Maya slumped onto her couch, the phone feeling cold and heavy in her hand. The news felt like a physical blow, a second death. All of her mother's careful planning, her years of quiet sacrifice, had been erased in a digital instant by faceless, untouchable criminals. Leo went on, peppering the conversation with technical-sounding jargon. Digital mules, IP spoofing, cryptocurrency tumblers, painting a picture of an unstoppable and anonymous force. He sounded as devastated as she felt. In that moment, their shared grief was compounded by a shared sense of violation. They were united in their victimhood. For the next 2 months, Maya accepted this bleak new reality. Leo would call periodically with updates that only confirmed the lie. "The FBI has a file open, but it's one of thousands just like it," he'd report, his voice full of weary resignation. He masterfully managed her emotions, ensuring they remained aligned as fellow victims of a terrible, random crime. Believing him was easier than contemplating any other possibility. As the weeks turned into months, Leo reported that the house would have to be sold just to cover the estate's final legal fees and taxes. There would be nothing left for him or Maya. It was a total loss. Yet, a small, persistent feeling of dissonance began to form in the back of Maya's mind. It wasn't a suspicion, not yet, but a quiet question that wouldn't leave her alone. Her mother, Eleanor, was profoundly analog. She was a woman of paper and pen. She distrusted online banking, paid every bill with a paper check she mailed at the post office, and would call Maya in a panic if a website asked for her date of birth. How could a woman who barely used email become the target of a highly sophisticated online theft? The narrative didn't fit the character. It felt like a movie plot imposed on a life that had no digital footprint. This feeling lingered, a tiny splinter in her thoughts. During a final weekend visit to Ohio to help clear out the house before it was listed for sale, Maya walked through her mother's office. The room was filled with boxes, the scent of old paper and dust hanging in the air. Her eyes landed on the old oak desk and the heavy beige filing cabinets beside it. A sudden, inexplicable impulse took hold of her. "I'd like to keep these," she told Leo, who was busy taping up a box of kitchenware. "The desk and the filing cabinets. They remind me of her." Leo shrugged, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "Sure, Maya. If you want that old junk, be my guest. It's less for me to haul away." He seemed relieved, almost eager for her to take them. Back at her own home, 3 states away, the furniture sat in her garage for a week. The thought of going through her mother's private papers felt like an intrusion, but the nagging inconsistency of Leo's story finally pushed her to act. One evening, she opened the drawers. It was an archaeological dig of a well-lived life. Tax returns from the 1980s, old car titles, warranties for appliances long since replaced. She finally reached the accordion files neatly labeled bank statements. Starting with the most recent, she found the statements for the new estate account Leo had opened. Just as he had described, the balance dropped from a healthy 6-figure sum to nearly zero over the course of a few days. The story appeared to be confirmed in black and white. For a moment, she felt a pang of guilt for her doubts. But that nagging instinct, a legacy of her mother's own meticulous nature, pushed her to look further, to go back just a little bit more in time. Driven by that unexplainable feeling that something was fundamentally wrong, Maya pulled out the files for her mother's personal savings account, the account that had existed for decades, the one that held the bulk of her life's savings before Leo had consolidated everything. She carefully spread the statements across her living room floor, creating a tangible timeline of her mother's final financial year. January, February, March, everything was exactly as it should be. The familiar rhythm of a stable, predictable life was printed in the columns of debits and credits, deposits from her librarian pension, checks for groceries from the local market, the annual payment to the town for property taxes. She picked up the very last statement, the one issued just days after her mother was admitted to the hospital for the last time. Her eyes scanned the columns. The usual small transactions were there. But then she stopped. Her breath caught in her throat. A cold, electric feeling shot through her. It wasn't the series of chaotic, small, and untraceable withdrawals she had been told to expect from a hacking incident. It was one transaction. A single, clean, colossal wire transfer for the amount of $156,450.22. The date of the transfer was April 10th. It was 2 full days before Leo had called her with his panicked, breathless story about identity theft. Her blood ran cold. This wasn't the work of a shadowy syndicate. This was a single, deliberate, authorized action. Her eyes darted across the line item, searching for a destination, a clue, anything. Printed in the bank's stark, emotionless font were the words, "Wire transfer to Apex Strategic Solutions, LLC." The name was generic, corporate, and sterile. It sounded legitimate, not like a thief's Cayman Islands account. With her hands trembling, Maya scrambled for her laptop. Her fingers felt clumsy on the keyboard as she typed the company name into a search engine. The top result was a business registration filed with the Ohio Secretary of State. Apex Strategic Solutions LLC had been formed only 6 months prior, a fact that sent another jolt through her. Her heart was pounding against her ribs as she clicked to view the details of the filing. She scrolled down the sterile, bureaucratic page to the section for the company's legally registered agent. The name listed was not Leo. It was a woman named Isabella Rossi. The address was a P.O. box in Leo's town. A quick search on social media for that name alongside Leo's brought up an avalanche of photos. The two of them smiling at holiday parties, on a beach vacation, arms around each other at a family barbecue. Isabella Rossi was his wife. Apex Strategic Solutions was a shell corporation registered by her sister-in-law. In that instant, the world tilted. It was a moment of horrifying, absolute clarity. The grief over the lost money was consumed by the burning, nauseating realization of the betrayal. There was no hack. There was no phantom thief. There was only Leo. For 2 days, Maya barely slept or ate. The crime was no longer a mystery, but a deeply personal wound, a violation that felt almost physical. Leo hadn't just been a thief, he had been a performer. He had directed a play in which he cast himself as a fellow victim, all while hiding the stolen inheritance. His deception was more painful than the theft itself. She knew a direct, emotional confrontation would be useless. He was a practiced liar, and would deny, deflect, and try to manipulate the situation, twisting her grief-fueled accusations against her. This offense was against the entire family, and more importantly, against Eleanor's memory. The truth had to be revealed with the cold, irrefutable force of evidence. She methodically printed everything: the bank statement showing the wire transfer, the LLC registration documents from the state website with Isabella's name on it, and screenshots of social media profiles that established the link between them. She made a call to a forensic accountant her friend recommended, who confirmed her findings over the phone. "This is not the work of a hacker," the accountant said calmly. "This is a classic case of embezzlement by a fiduciary. The paper trail is direct and undeniable." Armed with this validation, she called for an emergency family meeting. She invited her Aunt Carol and Uncle David, Eleanor's siblings, telling them there had been a major, urgent new development in the estate case. She then called Leo, feigning a hopeful, almost excited tone. "Leo, I think I found a lead on the stolen money," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hand. "I found a strange company name. We need to talk about it with the family." He readily agreed to meet at their aunt's house, likely confident he could dismiss whatever minor discrepancy she might have found. The atmosphere in Aunt Carol's living room was thick with a mixture of hope and anxiety. Leo, looking calm and concerned, played his part to perfection. He settled into an armchair, ready to be the knowledgeable guide through this latest development. He even began by giving a somber update on his own efforts, detailing another fruitless conversation with a police detective. He sighed, shaking his head. Mom would have just hated all this complication. When he finished, Maya took a deep, steadying breath. "You're right, Leo," she said, her voice clear and firm, cutting through the quiet room. "Mom would have hated this, especially because a stranger didn't do it." Leo's head snapped toward her. A flash of irritation crossed his face before he composed it into a mask of pity. "Maya, I know this has been incredibly difficult to accept. It's natural to look for other explanations." "I don't need to accept your story," she interrupted, her voice rising with a controlled force that surprised everyone, including herself. "Because I have the real one." She stood and placed the first document on the coffee table. "This is Mom's last bank statement. You told us all the money was stolen by hackers around April 12th. But this statement shows that on April 10th, you, as executor, authorized a single wire transfer for over $156,000. The color drained from Leo's face. That was a security transfer," he stammered, his eyes darting between the faces in the room. "The lawyers advised me to move the funds to protect them. The bank system was compromised." "A security transfer to this company?" Maya placed the second document on the table, the LLC registration for Apex Strategic Solutions. "A company that your wife, Isabella, founded just 6 months ago." Aunt Carol let out a sharp, strangled gasp. Uncle David, a stoic man of few words, simply stared at his nephew, his face a mask of cold, profound disbelief. Leo began to sputter, the structure of his elaborate lies crumbling in real time. "That's a misunderstanding. A coincidence. Apex is a legitimate business. There must be a clerical error." "There is no misunderstanding, Leo." Maya's voice was now trembling with adrenaline and righteous anger. "You created a shell company. You took control of our mother's money, and you wired every last cent of her legacy to yourself. Then you looked me in the eye, week after week, and you lied. You cried with me. You made our entire family grieve for money that was sitting in your bank account. You used our mother's death as the cover for your crime." The room was completely deafeningly silent, the only sound Leo's ragged, shallow breathing. Exposed and cornered, his web of deceit torn apart, he did not confess with words. He simply fell apart, burying his face in his hands, a defeated, pathetic figure whose betrayal had finally been brought into the light. What followed was not a series of dramatic family arguments or pleas for forgiveness. It was the cold, methodical, and impersonal process of justice. There were no more discussions. Maya had already consulted with a lawyer and knew exactly what she had to do. The next morning, carrying a folder containing her meticulously organized evidence, she walked into a police station and filed a formal report for felony theft. She then filed a petition with the probate court to have Leo immediately removed as executor and to compel a full accounting of the estate. The legal battle was emotionally taxing, but the evidence was irrefutable. The clean paper trail made the case straightforward for financial crime detectives. They followed the money from Eleanor's estate account directly to the Apex Strategic Solutions account, and from there into Leo and Isabella's personal accounts. It was a simple, direct line. Leo was charged with felony embezzlement and federal wire fraud. In the courtroom, he was a diminished figure, the confident mask he had worn for years, gone completely. The evidence was presented calmly and methodically. He was convicted. His reputation as a competent businessman was destroyed, his small consulting firm collapsed, and he was sentenced to prison. Through the court's actions, and because the theft was discovered relatively quickly, about 80% of the stolen money was frozen and eventually recovered. But the family is forever fractured. A line was drawn in Aunt Carol's living room that day, and it can never be erased. While most of the family recoiled from Leo's actions, a few relatives made quiet, damaging excuses for him, whispering that he must have been under financial pressure, as if that could ever justify such a profound betrayal. Awkward holidays are now spent with half the family missing. Phone calls go unanswered. The easy, unspoken trust that once bound them together has been replaced by a painful, cautious distance. Maya recovered most of her mother's inheritance, but she lost her brother and the sense of security her family once represented. The case of Eleanor's quiet legacy serves as a harsh reminder that the most damaging betrayals often come from the people we least suspect, wrapped in a performance of love and concern. And that is the complete story of Leo's quiet betrayal, a shocking abuse of trust that unfolded right under his family's nose. If this story has opened your eyes to how vulnerable an estate can be, take a moment to hit that like button. It helps me reach and educate more families. Now, the story is over, but our investigation is just beginning. Let's get to work. Excellent. The narrative is complete. We now pivot from the story to the investigation. This section marks the shift in tone from storyteller to clinical analyst. Here, we will dissect the psychological mechanics that allowed this crime to occur. I will break down each tactic with precision, linking the concepts directly to the events and behaviors you just witnessed in the story of Leo and Maya. You have just heard the complete story of the crime, the what. Now we must understand the how and the why. A financial crime of this nature is never just about the money. It's about the methodical manipulation of human trust. As your family wealth detective, we are going to rewind the tape of this case and expose the specific psychological tactics that made this betrayal possible. These are the invisible weapons used by a financial predator, and learning to recognize them is your most critical defense. The foundation of Leo's entire crime was built on a tactic known as affinity fraud. In most cases, we associate this with criminals who exploit a shared group identity, like a religion or ethnicity. But in a family context, the affinity is the family unit itself, the most powerful and implicit bond of trust we have. Leo didn't just rely on being family, he cultivated a specific, highly effective version of this fraud, the helper persona. Remember how the family described Leo? He was the rock. He was the local son who helped with the yard work, drove Eleanor to appointments, and projected an air of business competence. These were not just acts of familial duty, they were strategic investments. Each act of service was a deposit into a bank of trust he intended to exploit later. He wasn't just a stepson, he was the helpful stepson, the reliable one, the competent one. This persona is dangerously effective because it creates a powerful cognitive bias in the people around the perpetrator. When someone is perceived as the dedicated helper, especially with an aging parent, any questioning of their actions feels like an act of deep ingratitude or disrespect. Maya, living 3 states away and burdened by her own guilt, was psychologically primed to see Leo's management of the estate not as a risk, but as a relief. He was solving a problem for her. The helper persona acts as a shield against scrutiny. It disarms potential suspicion before it can even form. Leo understood that by being the family's indispensable problem solver, no one would ever think to look closely at the very problems he was pretending to solve. A perpetrator like Leo knows that the period immediately following a loved one's death is not just a time of sadness, it is a period of profound cognitive impairment. The second tactic he employed was the weaponization of grief. He strategically used the family's bereavement as both a smokescreen and an accelerant for his crime. When a person experiences the acute grief of losing a parent, their brain is flooded with stress hormones. The prefrontal cortex, the part of our brain responsible for executive functions, like critical thinking, rational decision-making, and detailed analysis, is significantly compromised. We are in a state of emotional survival, what psychologists often call the fog of sorrow. Our ability to process complex information, question authority, or detect deception is at its absolute lowest. Leo's timing was lethally precise. He waited a month, allowing the initial administrative chaos of the funeral to pass, and then he struck. He delivered his elaborate lie at the peak of Maya's emotional vulnerability. He knew she was not in a state to ask for evidence, to demand three-way calls with the bank, or to question the technical jargon he used. Furthermore, the lie itself was perfectly crafted for a grieving mind. He presented an external, overwhelming, and anonymous enemy, sophisticated international hackers. For a person already crushed by loss, it is psychologically easier to accept another tragic event caused by a faceless stranger than it is to confront the possibility of a betrayal from within the family. A betrayal would require more emotional energy, more confrontation, more pain. His lie offered a shared enemy, allowing him and Maya to bond as fellow victims, a psychologically comforting position that further insulated him from suspicion. He didn't just exploit her grief, he used it as the central pillar of his entire deception. The final layer of Leo's psychological assault was his commitment to calculated deception and, when cornered, the use of gaslighting. First, let's consider the premeditation. The discovery that the shell corporation, Apex Strategic Solutions, was created 6 months before Eleanor's death is the most critical psychological marker in this case. This tells us that Leo's crime was not a desperate, impulsive act born of financial pressure, as some family members later tried to claim. This was a cold, predatory plan. This level of forethought is a hallmark of individuals with a diminished capacity for empathy, who view family members not as people to be loved, but as resources to be exploited. The intricate lie about hackers wasn't an afterthought, it was part of the original design. Second, when his deception was finally challenged, he immediately resorted to gaslighting. Gaslighting is a form of psychological manipulation where a perpetrator seeks to make their victim question their own sanity, perception, or memory. When Maya presented him with the first piece of undeniable evidence at the family meeting, his response was a masterclass in this tactic. He didn't initially refute the evidence itself, he attacked her state of mind. Remember his words, "Maya, I know this has been incredibly difficult to accept. It's natural to look for other explanations. Let's break that down." He is invalidating her discovery by framing it as a symptom of her grief. He is suggesting that she is not a rational investigator who has found facts, but an emotional wreck who is creating fantasies. This is a classic attempt to warp reality, to make the victim feel like they are the one who is confused or overreacting. It is a desperate, last-ditch effort to maintain control by destroying the victim's confidence in their own mind. These three tactics, the helper persona, weaponized grief, and calculated gaslighting, formed a powerful psychological arsenal that allowed this crime to succeed for as long as it did. Excellent. The psychological analysis is complete. We now move to the legal and financial forensics of the case. This section will be a clinical breakdown of the specific laws that were broken and the evidence that made the conviction inevitable. We will transition from the complexities of human psychology to the hard certainties of the legal system. The psychological tactics we've discussed are what allowed Leo to operate without suspicion. But once his actions came to light, The case moved from the realm of emotion to the clear, cold domain of the law. His actions were not just an immoral betrayal of trust, they were a series of distinct, prosecutable felonies. Let's examine the specific crimes that led to his conviction. The first and most fundamental violation in this case is the breach of fiduciary duty. This is the cornerstone of estate law, and it's a concept you absolutely must understand. A fiduciary is a person placed in a position of special trust and confidence to manage the assets of another. An executor of a will is a fiduciary. This status confers upon them the highest standard of care recognized by law. Think of it as a legal promise. The fiduciary promises to act with complete loyalty, in good faith, and to make decisions that are solely in the best interest of the estate and its beneficiaries. They must avoid any self-dealing or conflicts of interest. Their own financial needs are legally irrelevant. Leo violated this duty from the very beginning. His first action was not to protect the estate, but to plot how to steal from it. The moment he created the Apex Strategic Solutions shell corporation with the intent to divert estate funds, he breached his fiduciary duty. The wire transfer was simply the final brazen act in a long chain of bad faith. In the eyes of the probate court, this is the original sin of an executor. It is an abuse of the legal power granted to him by Eleanor and the court, and it was the primary reason for his immediate removal as executor once Maya presented her evidence. While the breach of fiduciary duty is a civil wrong, Leo's actions quickly escalated into the criminal sphere. The specific crime he committed against the estate is embezzlement. It's critical to distinguish this from common theft. If a stranger breaks into a house and steals property, that is theft. Embezzlement is different, and in many ways, more insidious. It is the fraudulent taking of assets by a person to whom those assets were entrusted. The crime is born from a position of trust. As the executor, Leo was given lawful possession and control over the funds in Eleanor's estate account. He could legally write checks and authorize transfers to pay bills and manage the estate. However, he did not have legal ownership of the funds. That ownership belonged to the estate itself, for the benefit of the beneficiaries, in this case, himself and Maya. The crime of embezzlement occurred the instant he fraudulently converted the estate's assets for his own personal use. By wiring the $156,450 to his wife's shell company, a company with no legitimate business purpose related to the estate, he illegally appropriated that money. He took assets he was supposed to protect and treated them as his own. This single act is the textbook definition of embezzlement, a felony in nearly every state. The method Leo chose to embezzle the funds added another, even more serious charge to his case: federal wire fraud. This is the element that often escalates a state-level crime into a federal investigation with much more severe consequences. The law, specifically 18 U.S. Code Section 1343, is quite direct. To commit wire fraud, a person must have a scheme or plan to defraud someone of money or property, and they must use interstate electronic communications, a wire, in the execution of that scheme. Leo's plan to steal the inheritance was the scheme to defraud. The crucial action was his use of a bank wire transfer to move the money from the estate account to his shell company's account. Because that electronic signal almost certainly crossed state lines at some point, as it was routed through the federal banking system, his actions fell under the jurisdiction of federal law. That single mouse click to authorize the transfer was his most costly mistake from a legal standpoint. It exposed him to investigation by the FBI and prosecution by the U.S. Attorney's Office. It transformed him from a local thief into a federal felon, adding years to his potential sentence and demonstrating the serious view the justice system takes on the use of our financial infrastructure to commit crimes. In many financial crime cases, prosecutors have to assemble a complex puzzle. But in Leo's case, thanks to Maya's diligence and Eleanor's record-keeping, the evidence formed a simple, direct, and unbreakable chain. Imagine a prosecutor presenting this in court. The case would be brutally efficient. Exhibit A would be Eleanor's personal bank statement, showing a balance of over $156,000 before her death. This establishes the existence of the asset. Exhibit B would be the wire transfer authorization form for $156,450.22, signed by Leo in his capacity as executor of the estate. This shows his direct action. Exhibit C would be the corresponding bank statement for Apex Strategic Solutions LLC, showing the deposit of that exact amount on the same day. This shows the destination of the stolen funds. Exhibit D would be the official registration document from the Ohio Secretary of State for Apex Strategic Solutions, clearly listing Leo's wife, Isabella Rossi, as the registered agent. This irrefutably links the destination account directly back to Leo's immediate family. There are no gaps in this chain. There is no plausible deniability. Leo's elaborate story about hackers was a narrative, but these documents were facts. This clear, linear trail of evidence is why the legal process was so swift and the convictions so certain. It is a powerful lesson that even in a digital age, a simple paper trail can be the most powerful weapon for the truth. The analysis of the crime is complete. We have dissected the psychology of the perpetrator and the legal consequences of his actions. We now arrive at the most important part of our work: prevention. A case like this is a tragedy, but the knowledge we extract from it can be forged into a shield. I will now give you 3 non-negotiable strategies to implement in your own estate planning that would have made Leo's crime virtually impossible to commit. This is how you move from being a spectator to being a protector. The single greatest vulnerability in Eleanor's estate plan was the appointment of a sole executor. This structure creates a single point of failure and provides one person with absolute, unchecked power. The solution is to eliminate that structure entirely. When you are drafting your will or trust, you must mandate co-executorship. This means appointing 2 or more people to act jointly. But simply naming 2 people is not enough. You must build in a mechanism for accountability. The key is to include a specific clause requiring 2 signatures for any single transaction, be it a check, a withdrawal, or a wire transfer over a preset amount. A reasonable limit is often between $2,500 and $5,000. For the strongest protection, consider appointing 1 trusted family member and 1 professional or corporate fiduciary, such as an estate planning attorney or the trust department of a bank. The family member provides personal oversight, while the professional provides impartial, expert adherence to the law. This system of checks and balances makes it structurally impossible for one person, like Leo, to simply drain an account on their own authority. A simple clause in a legal document creates a powerful defense. The second critical failure point was the environment of secrecy that allowed Leo's lie to fester for months. Fraud thrives in darkness and withers under scrutiny. As a beneficiary of an estate, you have a legal right to information, but you must be proactive in exercising that right. Do not wait for an executor to volunteer information. From the very beginning, you must formally request a full accounting. I recommend sending a formal letter or email and sending it via certified mail to create a legal record of your request. The language should be polite, but firm. You can write, "Pursuant to my rights as a beneficiary of the estate of name, I formally request 2 things. First, a complete inventory of all assets and liabilities of the estate as of the date of death. And second, copies of all monthly financial statements for all bank and brokerage accounts held by the estate going forward." This single action does 2 powerful things. It provides you with a baseline of all the assets, so you know exactly what should be there. And it puts a potentially dishonest executor on immediate notice that you are watching, that you are organized, and that you will be monitoring every transaction. This simple act of requesting documentation is often enough to deter a crime before it ever begins. This single strategy, formally requesting documentation, is the most powerful, no-cost tool a beneficiary has. Share this video with anyone you know dealing with a family estate. This information is too important to keep to yourself. Maya's discovery ultimately relied on her mother's old paper files and a good deal of luck. We cannot leave our family's legacy to chance. A modern estate plan requires a modern system of verification that is completely independent of the executor. The solution is to create a verification file or a legacy binder. This can be a physical binder stored with a trusted attorney or a secure, encrypted digital vault. Inside this file, you should place a comprehensive snapshot of your financial life, copies of the most recent statements for all bank accounts, brokerage accounts, and retirement funds, a list of all life insurance policies and their values, deeds to real estate, and the contact information for your financial advisor, accountant, and lawyer. Here is the crucial step. Access to this verification file should not be given to your executor. Instead, access instructions should be given directly to your primary beneficiaries or to a designated third-party protector. This creates an independent system of checks and balances. Your executor's job is to gather and manage the assets, but your beneficiaries can now use the verification file to confirm that everything has been accounted for. It prevents a dishonest executor from being able to lie about the existence of an asset because the beneficiary already has a record of it. This removes the opportunity for a crime like Leo's to ever take root. The story of Eleanor's estate is a tragic blueprint of how trust, when left unchecked, can become a catastrophic liability. Leo was able to weaponize his family's grief and exploit his position because no systems of verification were in place to stop him. The ultimate lesson from case file No. 58 is this: trust is an emotion, but financial security requires a process. You can and should trust your family, but you must verify their actions with sound legal and financial structures. The knowledge you have gained from this analysis is your first and most powerful line of defense. You now know the psychological tactics to watch for, the legal lines that cannot be crossed, and the practical strategies to build a fortress around your family's legacy. For more in-depth case files that can help you protect your family's wealth, subscribe and activate notifications. Now, let's make a commitment to action. Tell me in the comments, based on what you learned today, what is the first family financial protection strategy you are going to implement?